You see, I've got this nice icy drink here to try and help douse the flame war that I am inevitably about to start in this video. Kiwi strawberry. Pretty good. Royal Purple. I use it. And I've been using it for a long time now, several years, and I've actually used several different formulas. And although I cannot vouch for the technical and mechanical aspect of the proprietary formula that is used in conjunction with the engineering of an internal combustion engine, what I can do for you is at least offer my opinion based on my real world experiences using it in my daily driver. So once again, we're talking about Derpy here, which is a 2003 Mitsubishi Outlander, front wheel drive. So she's nothing special, and you might be saying, well, why would you spend the extra money on Royal Purple when you can get something cheap and run it like that? And you're totally right, I could run something cheap in this car, and trust me, I used to. But there were some differences that I noticed, and I'm not gonna chalk it up to some sort of lubricant wizardry, let's say. I'm gonna try and help explain why I think this oil has helped in certain aspects. And no, it's not gonna give you some magical horsepower gain, but there are some subtle differences that you may notice when you drive the same car a lot. So it's time to give you guys a bit of backstory. I have been using Royal Purple engine oil for a number of years now. I would say, if I had to guess, at least 5 years. And about 5 years ago, let's say, because I'm just kind of estimating here, I do have actually written down every single oil change I've ever done myself in a detailed log, but I'm not looking at that right now. I'm filming. So the last 5 years, I've been using the regular Royal Purple SAE formula in my engine. However, about 2 years ago, I hit the 120,000 mile mark on my engine, and I decided, you know what? Royal Purple makes the HMX formula, which is their high mileage variant, has an additive, this cyanide, whatever it's called, dude. I can't pronounce that word no matter how hard I try. But the point is, it's designed for engines with more miles on it, and there's a few things that this does that the normal oil doesn't particularly do, and I'll explain that in a minute. Now, before I started doing my own oil changes, I had Firestone take care of my oil changes, and they would just put in whatever they put in. They wouldn't really tell me what they were putting in. So obviously you're wondering, well, what happened when you changed? Well, I'll tell you what happened after I stopped using them. I first went to Pennzoil, full synthetic oil, and I had a friend help me with it back then before I was doing my own oil changes myself, because I didn't have all the tools on hand for some reason. And you know what? I will tell you this. Things started to feel like there was less resistance in the engine. You can feel when accelerating that there's less sloshiness going around. It's kind of a hard thing to say, like, okay, if you're trying to push against something, it feels like there's less resistance. And, inside of an internal combustion engine, there's a lot of moving parts. And obviously they're getting oil, and there's going to be some resistance to some extent. It just felt like there was a little bit less of that. Now, when I switched over to regular Royal Purple, their SAE formula, it felt even better than that. Now, what the HMX formula does is not wizardry in any sense. It's what any high mileage oil does. There is a mild additive that's it's a mild detergent, so to speak, that helps break gunk off of the parts that it touches, and the HMX oil will keep that gunk suspended in the oil. Now, of course, when I use any Royal Purple oil, I do pair it up with the Royal Purple filter, which, I don't know if it's going to talk about it here, but they have this synthetic material, and the pores on the synthetic material are a lot finer. than your standard cardboard kind of filters. So it'll trap certain detritus and such that is of a smaller size than your typical filter will. And it seems like it doesn't impede oil flow. Now the filters are also much better than the Fram filters I was using with that Pennzoil from a long time ago. It's a solid metal housing, and it's got this big, very well made rubber gasket, or silicone, I forget what this is exactly. I know there's a slight difference between the two, but the point is it seals really well. It's very well made. I have not cut them open. I've never felt like I needed to. They seem to do really well, and they stay on pretty well, and I would say, based on the clarity of the oil that comes out every 3,000 miles, and yes, I do it at 3,000 miles, I'll explain in a minute, the oil comes out looking pretty darn good. When I first did that oil change away from Firestone, and I was putting in that Pennzoil for the first time, the oil was black as sin, and dude, it was nasty. It wasn't right. And on top of that, I checked the dipstick. They were putting in barely enough oil to meet the minimum requirements for how much oil should be in my engine, which is why I stopped using them. And when I used the Pennzoil, I just was, at the time, just wanting to get away from Firestone. That's why I used Pennzoil. And when I switched to Royal Purple, the SAE formula, you know, everything was going pretty good and pretty slick. Now, when I switched over to the HMX, because we're talking about the HMX formula here in particular in conjunction with Derpy here at 135,000 miles, that light detergent is getting that gunk off of stuff. And what this oil does is when it comes in contact with certain gaskets and seals, what it tries to do is re-soften those gaskets so they don't crack. Because when they crack, they start to leak. And that's one of the nice things about this oil. How it does it specifically, I really couldn't tell you. But I will say this, everything feels really nice. Now, when I switched over from the SAE over to the HMX, I did notice one thing. And this could be totally just random, and it just could be unaccounted for. It could be variance, but keep in mind I'm a very consistent driver. I use cruise control all the time. I go to very consistent speeds. So when I talk about this particular metric, I'm not all over the place when I talk about it, and that's the fuel economy, the miles per gallon. And no, it's nothing insane. I didn't suddenly gain 10 miles per gallon. No, it wasn't anything like that. I have a scan gauge 2 hooked up to the OBD2 port on my car, and it's been calibrated properly, and I've been using it for several years as well. Now, what I did notice is that when driving in a consistent manner, using cruise control 90% of the time, and going at consistent speeds down the same routes, I was averaging, now keyword averaging, approximately 1 mile per gallon higher than when I was using the SAE blend. Now, that could totally be within the area of expected variances between certain tests, and it could mean, hey, maybe this oil is doing something a little extra. Maybe it's totally coincidence. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it is or isn't, because I can't guarantee that. But what I can tell you is that the engine runs flawlessly. For an engine that is over 15 years old and 135,000 miles on it, the scan gauge 2 seems to be suggesting that the engine is liking this better. It definitely is miles ahead of whatever the heck that Firestone was putting in my engine. I will tell you that. There feels like there's less resistance in the engine than when I was using Pennzoil, and that's just a personal feel. I have been driving this car for about a decade now, so I'm very familiar with this car, and when something's askew, I certainly can tell, because this has been my daily driver for 10 years straight, every single day. So when I feel something wrong, it can be very minute, and I have other people drive the car for me and tell me what they think. And they're not picking up on the things that I'm finding out, and I always have a mechanic double check if there's anything wrong, and that has saved my butt a few times just because there's something slightly, just barely off. Because, you know, when you drive the same vehicle, you can tell if it's your daily driver. You can tell something's off after a certain amount of time, if it's something kind of sudden. So what I'm getting at here is when you pair a good filter with good oil, and Royal Purple HMX oil on Amazon is about $43, $45 for 5 quarts. I can get it cheaper at a local racing parts store, which is why I buy it. It's not all that much more expensive than regular Royal Purple. And Royal Purple is more expensive than your typical oil. I am not denying that. And is it worth the extra price? Well, that's really something that's going to have to be determined in the long run. How long is my engine going to work? Well, that depends on how well I maintain it. And I do all the high mileage maintenance on this engine. There's really nothing much left to be done at this particular point. Now, you may have heard me earlier say I changed the oil at 3,000 miles. And you might be thinking, dude, what gives? It's synthetic oil. You should be able to go 6,000 at least. You're totally right. But here's why I don't. Now, I contacted Royal Purple directly about this, and I asked, hey, what kind of mileage can I expect for the life of the oil when I put this in? And they said, the first time you switch to Royal Purple HMX, the first run of it, only do 3,000. When you change the oil, flush this out, put a new filter on, and put more HMX back in, then go ahead and do 6,000. And that first 3,000 is important because that light detergent is clearing off gunk. It's not like Seafoam in the sense that it's a hardcore detergent that you run for about 20 miles and it gets a crap ton of all this gunk off, you know, sludge and whatnot. That's not how this works. This is very subtle, very slow acting. But when you first put it in, just know it has that small detergent for high mileage oils to help clear up that gunk. And that first time you run it, it's going to have that gunk that it collects, and that's why you want to flush it after 3,000. Now, once all that gunk's gone, get up to 6,000. Or, and this is from Royal Purple, or 1 year. And the reason 1 year is because, well, I'm in Illinois, and the weather is crazy. It gets super hot, super cold, super humid, super dry. And the fact of the matter is, you know, it's hard to find a perfect seal on anything, and there could be a chance that moisture could get into the engine somehow over the course of a year. So they say, just to be safe, if you don't drive 6,000 miles in that year, you might want to just consider changing the oil out anyway. I don't usually drive 6,000 miles in 1 year. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends on a variety of different things, but you know, it's either 6,000 miles or a year, and it usually ends up being a year at around like 3,000 miles for whatever reason. Now let's have a toast to celebrate that dose of reality. Oh, it tastes like fanboy tears. And the reason I say that is because there is an extremely ridiculous amount of people who are so hardcore for like one oil over the other. And it could be you're a serious Royal Purple fan, or you're a serious AMSOIL fan, or you're the kind of guy who says, dude, I put the cheapest stuff in my car and it's never run bad. And, well, fact of the matter is, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Because, first off, every engine's different. Every way people use their car is different. You know, the kind of stresses you put on your engine could be different too. I mean, if you're driving all highway miles on a very fuel-efficient engine that just sips gas and isn't putting out a ton of horsepower or torque all the time, you know, yeah, the cheap stuff I'm sure will do you good. And because it's cheap, you can afford to replace it as many times as you want. It's going to cost you less than this stuff. Salty. But there are also those people that are going to be out there and be like, I only put the best stuff in my car because I know what the best stuff is because one reason or another. Now, okay, we could get into like technical stuff. Like, what group oil is this? You know, in the United States, Group 3, let me rephrase that. Only in the United States can you classify a Group 3 oil as fully synthetic. Now, Group 3 oil, if I remember correctly, can be defined as a very highly refined mineral oil. But that doesn't exactly mean it's genuinely synthetic. There's all these different terms like full synthetic, 100% synthetic, group 3, 4, and 5. And okay, so what group is this? Because, I mean, your standard run-of-the-mill synthetic oil is going to be group 3 for sure. If you get something like Redline, yeah, you're going to be paying $70 a quart. But that's group 5 oil, and there's a good reason it is the way it is. It's not something you put in your standard car that you drive every day. It's for special applications. Group 4 is a bit of an awkward zone. And like I said, I'm not going to get into all these crazy technical details because I'm not an engineer, guys. All I can say is that I like the oil, and from what I can gather, for me, it's worth the extra money. Even if I don't drive my car a bajillion freaking miles. You know, some people put 1,000,000 miles on a single engine. They proudly proclaim that they can take their car from here to the moon and back. And some people, you know, unfortunately, their car blows up after 10,000 miles. There's 1,000,001 variables as to why that is, but can you really narrow it down to specifically the oil you use? I'm not quite sure. Maybe someone can, but I sure can't. All I can say is that I noticed my engine feels better. It idles a little less roughly. It feels like there's less resistance when I'm pushing it hard and flooring it. According to my scan gauge and based on the consistent style of driving that I do on the highway, on the same routes that I take, on that same stretch of highway, according to the scan gauge, I'm getting approximately 1 more mile per gallon than I used to. Now, what does this really equate to? Don't expect oil to magically give you more performance or MPG, but you can say that it's probably going to help the engine in the sense that it's doing the thing it's supposed to do in this case. Remove excess sludge slowly while lubricating the best it can, better than some cheaper oils based on some statistical data that we've seen. And soften some gaskets that are getting old. Now, it's not going to keep them brand new feeling forever, but it's going to extend the life of those gaskets that it touches just a wee bit to make things run a little better, a little longer. It's not going to save your car forever. You need to do your maintenance. So, when you use this oil, I can, in my opinion, honestly say I feel it's worth the extra cost, and I think it really is better. Did I send my oil in for analyzation every single time I've done an oil change for the past 5-6 years? No, I haven't. And I really should do the analyzation because I am curious. But for right now, for the style of driving that I do, man, it seems to really feel good in the engine. And yeah, it's probably a bit overkill for this car right now. But, you know, there's a philosophy that is sometimes better to overdo it than to underdo it. In this case, paying extra for something that's supposed to be better oil than something that's like garbage, I don't see any harm in it. So that's my spiel on Royal Purple. I'm a big fan of Royal Purple, but I'm not a nut about the stuff. You know, I think it's great oil, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all of oils. But take that for what it's worth, guys. If you stuck with me this long, I appreciate you. And hopefully, maybe this gives you some ideas about what to think about when you buy higher-end oil.